The Celtics Talk podcast is presented by 24autogroup.com, 11 locations across New England.
What's up, everybody? Off day edition of the Celtics Talk podcast coming to you. We needed a palate cleanser. We needed to move on from that terrible Chicago loss. We needed to stop talking about the referees. We needed to stop talking about all the three-point shots the Celtics missed. So we're going to shift gears today. And I told you guys earlier this week, December 15th, that's the official start of trade season. It's also what I like to call the start of Bobby Marks season. My old buddy at ESPN, front office insider. Bobby Marks is so good with all the cap stuff, with knowing like what every team in the league needs. And I love bringing Bobby on this program around this time of year to just talk about like how the Celtics can move forward. I wanted to get his perspective on how the Celtics decided to keep this roster intact coming into the season and what are the potential moves they can make moving forward. And I think Bobby brought some great expertise. He's down there at the G League Showcase checking out some of the younger guys, but he also knows like some loopholes in this new CBA that the Celtics could look at some talent that might be available on the market, breaking down the roster space, Jaden Springer's future, the payroll, draft picks into the future, all that good stuff. So if you want to move on from Justin Van Duyne and the officials, let's get into it with Bobby and talk about what the future for the Celtics might hold and what moves might happen before that early February trade deadline. Here's my conversation with Bobby Marks. All right, Bobby, I don't want to pigeonhole you to one season, but when the calendar hits December 15th, invariably you jump to mind. Trade season is here. And so it is Bobby Marks season. Before we get into the minutia of the Celtics and what their kind of limited options are, just give me the 10,000-foot view. What have you thought of the Celtics start? We're obviously recording this. They're coming off probably their worst shooting performance of the season. But in general, how have you thought the Celtics have fared this year?
Yeah, listen, I know Cleveland's got the best record overall and certainly in the Eastern Conference here. But I think based on what they were able to do last year, win a championship here, even if they don't finish with the number one seed, and there's still a lot of basketball to come, that they're probably still the favorite, I would say, based on everybody's together, barring an injury, knowing that they can win big games on the road. And I think there's certainly uneven games like when you're not shooting well from deep, and that's your kind of your MO a little bit here, you're going to get a little bit what you got in that Chicago game here. I think that's kind of been a little bit of a trend in some of the losses. Certainly when I think your three main guys shot 8 for 31, like that's a recipe for losing. We saw it a little bit when they played Brooklyn earlier in the year. So I would say, as expected, I thought it would be. I said this in there earlier before the season started that the Celtics could finish with the third best record in the East or second best, but still be considered the best, to consider the favorite. Because I think the regular season, it's for Cleveland coming off last year. I thought Indiana would be a little bit better. I thought New York, certainly Philadelphia. I thought teams like who kind of changed their parts. But I would be content where Boston is right now, just based. You played late into June. You had a bunch of guys play for the Olympics, play deep into the summer. Usually when you win a championship, you kind of take the foot off the gas here. And I think certainly where their record is and where their standing is, I don't think that's the case with this group.
Who do you think is the primary competition in the East based on early returns? I want to give New York some time with the changes they made. I'm with you. I'm a little surprised, but Indy did beat the Celtics early in the year. It seems like they get up for that matchup. It always seems like there's I think back to a couple years ago with the Hawks. There's always that one team that sort of gets to the East Finals and then kind of struggles the next year a little bit. I think they'll find their way. Is Cleveland for real? What's your take on the East?
I do. I do think they're for real. I think certainly their depth is a strength for them here. But as you know, when we get to the playoffs, we probably go 8-man rotation. The ninth, and who's the odd man out? Is Dean Wade or Isaac Okoro or Karis LeVert? Like who's the kind of the odd man out of that? Ty Jerome, another guy. Who's the odd man out? I would say Cleveland will finish with a top 2 seed, barring something disastrous here. I would say New York, I think, is a threat just based on how listen, their starting five is really good, like
Yeah.
really good. They're offensively, they're potent. Depth in the postseason doesn't matter as much during the regular season. They can't sustain an injury. That's the big thing with this starting five here because they are thin and we don't know when Mitchell Robinson's coming back. Indiana, I think, is starting to figure it out a little bit here. Their big thing is that they've been so bad on the road, and I
Mhm.
think they've won 3 in a row on the road, and I think they're 4-1 in the last 5. So they are starting to figure it out. It's hard for me to put Philadelphia. I just don't trust the
Mm.
Sixers, right? I can't trust them. They'll be in the play-in. Maybe they'll crack the top 6 and they go on a run here. Um, so I can't trust them. And then certainly Milwaukee's pretty fascinating. You guys saw them up close a couple weeks ago. I think they're a little bit dangerous, just because
Mhm.
I think they've got a lot of confidence. I like what they've done with. I think Doc's done one of his better jobs coaching this year, just keeping that group together. Giannis is playing like an MVP. Get Middleton back. I don't know if we're ever going to see the Chris Middleton that we saw
Yeah.
from a couple years ago, or even maybe even the first round against Indiana where he was really good. Miami's Miami. We'll see what happens with Jimmy Butler. Of course, that will be the X factor here. Oh, I thought Orlando could be
Yeah.
really dangerous, and I think they still can. But man, when you lose 2 guys with Caro and Wagner, and then your Achilles heel is still 3-point shooting, like they weren't a great 3-point shooting team to begin with. And now with those 2 players, and they're really heavy relying on Suggs and KCP and some of their younger players here. So I think it's setting up for Cleveland, Boston 1-2, however way it's going to be, and then
Mhm.
kind of figure out what the rest of the East is going to be.
Yeah, I was gonna say when yeah, you're down in Orlando, I was wondering what the vibes are down there. Like I know Paulo keeps talking about wanting to come
Yeah,
back, but that could be a nice little boost for them later in the year. They've kind of been able to tread without him. They have some heat with Boston. Our guy Eddie House got them riled up a couple years ago about where they stand in the NBA, but clearly they're moving forward. It's gonna be it is gonna be fun to see like exactly how the East shakes out. But I'm with you. Really feels like Cleveland asserted itself in both those games against Boston. I'm terrified of Donovan Mitchell in the
yeah.
playoffs. Even last year would have been different if they would have been a little bit healthier. I do want to, let's start with this. Were you interested? Were you, I guess, like, as someone who's put together a roster, like,
Yeah.
what did you think of Boston deciding to essentially keep it together, coming back? You don't often see even championship teams. Whether it's a guy, I think back to like 2008 Celtics and James Posey departs, and there's usually something that gets taken away. But the Celtics really got Luke and Tillman to come back
Yeah.
on veteran minimum deals. Decided, I mean, O'Shea Brissett's the only guy that ended up leaving, and like the door is still potentially open for him to return if they wanted to. So were you intrigued at all by like how Brad's decision to like give this group a chance as it was comprised?
I just think they earned it, right? When you win a championship, I think, and how the rules are in this day and age with this
Mm,
CBA, I think it's very hard for you to add from the outside and then trust those players that you add that haven't been part of your group. I think that is a huge, huge challenge. I mean, listen, Philadelphia basically changes most of their roster and then they get out of the gate extremely slow. Indiana on the other end, got out of the gate slow and brought
hmm.
basically their whole group back. But you could almost make the case for Indiana like they were kind of like the Lakers from a few years
Yeah.
ago. They get no Giannis, they get no Brunson at the end of the playoffs, and kind of maybe they kind of stepped into the Eastern Conference Finals here, but I just think I think the group earned it to be brought back. Certainly we knew that Jason was going to get that super
Hmm.
max. Hauser with his extension. You bring back some of your minimum just because you just trust them, right? You just kind of
Yeah.
trust as far as what you're going to be brought back. Certainly Derek gets an extension, and Drew from in the middle of last year, and then you make the decision. You get through this year, and if you don't win a championship, or if you don't go to a conference or NBA finals here, then you kind of can step back and evaluate as far as what you're going to do. But I just think, in all, like the biggest thing, especially when you're high spending teams like Boston is, the hardest thing to do is turn over the roster. Like
Hmm.
you play the minimum game every year where you're constantly, and we see that in Phoenix right now. Like when you're bringing in like 6 guys on the minimum contracts and they're not part of your fabric, like you got to go 500 on that, right? You got to
Yeah.
go 3 for 6. So, and there's a reason why, and certainly Tyus Jones is probably not a minimum player, but there's a reason why guys are out there kind of, as far as kind of that bargain shopping here. And I think that's the benefit that Boston has. I think the benefit that Boston has also is that unlike Milwaukee and Denver and Phoenix, teams that have spent a lot, they've got they're pretty much their draft picks
Yeah.
in pretty good shape, right? They owe that one pick, I think, in what 29, that goes
Hmm.
to Portland, I think, as far as from the holiday trade. But after that, like that's the most important thing. Like where even if you're picking 28 or 29, at least you've got one or two young players that you're going to come in through the pipeline. And then when Drew gets a little bit older, okay, maybe we have the next starting point guard, or maybe we can use that pick to trade for somebody. So that's why I've said what Boston's been able to do, and I know we can talk about where their finances are going to be next year, and they're going to be ridiculously high, but I do think it's sustainable, right? I think it's sustainable because your core guys are in the prime of their career, and they're not kind of at a dead end corner where, like, I'm watching Denver
Mm.
Thursday night, who loses in Portland. And listen, Denver's going to be talked about a lot because they're basically, it's same with Golden State. How do you maximize the Jokic window? How do you maximize his greatness when you can't trade Jamal Murray or Aaron Gordon because they just signed extensions? And basically, over the next 6 weeks, we're going to hear a lot about Michael Porter Jr., right? Because
Hmm.
they have no first round picks. They've got like one or 2 seconds, and they have Porter Jr., right? And they're an apron team. That's where, like I always say, it's like almost like playing cards at a table. Like eventually, like you run out of chips, man. Like you eventually you gotta take your medicine, and this is kind of who you are. But I do think with Boston, I think there are options to keep this group together if they want to. We'll see what happens when this ownership, transfer or
Yeah.
sell, whenever that happens. Who knows? I've been part of ownership. I've been part of a lot of different ownership groups. And listen, we went, going back revisionist history, we went to two NBA finals in '02 and '03, and we went to a conference semifinals and lost to the Pistons in 7 games. And we had a new ownership group that came in and said, like, break it up, tear it down, tear it down to the studs, build through the draft, do all that stuff. I don't think that's going to happen. But you just never know. So to answer the question, I was fine with what they were able to do. I didn't think they had many options to go out and,
Yeah.
and break up the chemistry. It's almost like, like we're talking about Cleveland, and I wrote about it in the article we had this
Mm.
week. It's like we're trying to like pick, 30 questions for each team, right? And like certainly Boston's like, what do you do with Springer? Do you save money? Do you open a roster spot? Like for Cleveland, who's a luxury tax team, haven't been one since LeBron. I think they're $1.9 million over. Do you trade a player and disrupt chemistry? Like, do
Mm.
you like is it worth the $18 million to you, that which is the distribution is going to be, to basically disrupt chemistry in your locker? And if you hypothetically traded Tristan Thompson because now you get under the luxury tax, is it worth it? And
Yeah.
that's the big thing, because it's not just on the court, it's basically kind of within your locker room.
Yeah, and it's fascinating because I even think back a couple years ago when the Celtics made that run to the NBA Finals, right? Like if they had won the finals that year against Golden State, I think they would have dipped into the tax, but they were willing to do that, again, earlier than they would have wanted to be there, and would have triggered potential repeater stuff. But I remember thinking, like, at some point you have to show your group that you're willing to spend to do that. I wonder if Cleveland, as much as you'd love, as easy as it would be, and you started talking about it, right? Like, not all those guys are going to play in the playoffs, but it is a fascinating scenario. I think you'd rather show your team that you're going for it, and then try to downshift.
When you step into 24 Infinity of Plymouth, you enter a realm of affordable luxury with lease payments as low as $399 a month on the new Infinity QX50 and the exceptional service you expect from the award-winning 24 Auto Group. Shop online at 24infinityofplymouth.com.
Okay, you mentioned all the sort of obstacles the Celtics have, and it kind of boils down to, I mean, I feel so bad. Jaden Springer has been in the headlines for like not the greatest of reasons, and ironically, he got to play a little bit last night, and you can see there's something there. He's super athletic, he
Yeah.
can defend, and yet the bottom line is he makes too much money. It's $4 million when you start
Yeah.
talking about the second apron team, and that counts for more like 16, whatever the
Yeah.
number is
Yeah.
at the end of the day. What do you think the team does here? The same deal? They're trying to lean it. They're trying to balance this road where they're trying to develop young talent for the future, and they've hit, from Hauser to, I mean, even you could throw Luke Cornett in that bucket
Yeah.
where he came here, he kind of
You
went
know
up the
what's
main
funny?
a
I
little
was
bit,
talking with Bontemps about this, your former colleague, and I said that Boston is starting to be like Miami North.
right?
Like Miami, like we talk about culture and great and how they find all these players, these under the radar, and they develop them. And I said to him, like Tim, I said, like Boston is Miami of the North because they find even their two-way guys, right? Like they find these
Yeah.
guys and like where did he come from? And like, oh, we've developed like even like Jordan Walsh, who I wrote I read this great article that was in maybe it was in the Globe or like he was hurt for one game, right? And basically
Yeah,
he
and he
had the
wanted to go
option of
play.
sitting out, right? Like, and he's like, like here's my opportunity, and it would have been easy for him there. So I do think that that is the benefit. And I think going back to your point with Jaden, I think for Boston they have to ask the question: how much does the savings and how much does the extra roster spot and who is because they already have a roster spot
Right.
available. How much does that mean to how does two open roster spots mean? How much value does that have to them? And who is out there to go out and sign? You can't sign a player who's bought out of his contract or waived that had earned a salary
Yeah.
of more than $12.8 million. So that group of players is eliminated here. What is the value of your second round picks?
Mm-hmm.
Because in the old days, you would have been able to trade cash and whatever is left on, let's say Springer had like 1.5 million left at the deadline that he was owed, and you'd give a team 2 million. You'd be able to do that.
Right.
And there you go. And that saves you that. But how much does your second round picks mean to you? Because if you are looking to move off them, it's going to cost you a second. I mean, that's
Yeah.
just the reality of it because you have nothing else to trade here. And then what does he mean to you moving forward? The Celtics are probably the ones that they've seen him in house. They know what's under the hood. Is he part of something that they can, they like his development. Maybe they sign him on a non-guaranteed in the offseason.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe go from there. So I think those are all the questions that Brad and that front office will have to ask over the the next 6 weeks here.
A couple things. You brought up the development track. It's funny. After they acquired Derek White, I sat down with Brad, and he actually said because the Celtics had not had some whiffs, but had guys in house that they could have developed. Javonte Green
Yeah,
and Max Strus, and like they seemed to they didn't have the ability to nurture that development in the moment because they were always kind of chasing that next step and trying to they didn't have a lot of playing time either. And Brad said, like, we got to get more like Miami
yeah,
and we got to find those guys and we got to develop them. And you start thinking about it from Hauser, undrafted two-way,
yeah,
to plucking Keita out of Sacramento's G League,
yeah,
to, Drew Peterson
yeah,
was down there, and I think in Miami's system last year, and they found him. They've got a couple hits here, and it's high praise to say that they've become Miami North because
yeah,
not a lot of teams have been good at this, and I think Brad would take that as a huge compliment. I think and I'm doing like this series later next year about it because I'm fascinated. Like, how did they go from continuously missing on those to like really kind of locking? I think
You
it
know
comes
what?
down to
One of the reasons why, Chris, is that these rules, the apron rules,
yeah,
it forces you to. It really it puts you on high alert, and it puts a lot of pressure on your scouting group to find talent, inexpensive talent, and then go out and develop them. And I think that's what you're doing because you really have limited options how you add from the outside. I
mm-hmm.
mean, that's the reality here is if you miss in the draft and or you don't have draft picks and you don't find the right guys, the clock starts to turn, right? Like eventually, like I had written, and you'll appreciate this from a writing perspective. I had written a 2,500 word article on the Bucks. This is when
Mm-hmm.
they were 2-8. Basically, like, hey, you know, they've been aggressive making trades, but they've run out of options, right? They're running out of options and stuff like that. And they've kind of, you know, their history of young players hasn't been great, like where
Mm-mm.
they are. And then, but then, okay, then Andre Jackson Jr. gets inserted in the starting lineup, and they get AJ Green coming off the bench, and he's been one of the better sixth men in the last 15
Mm-hmm.
games here. And that's what you need. Like that, like so I mean, I saw it in New Jersey, like when your group gets older, Kidd, Carter, Jefferson, and you miss in the draft and you don't
Mm.
have those younger players there, it makes it extremely harder. So going back on it, I do think the apron rules, this new CBA puts a higher emphasis and a more priority on scouting, developing guys, you know, you know, not losing faith in guys. Like that's, you know, kind of you have to kind of see it through the whole process.
So let's say that they decide. So they already spent a second round pick to acquire Jaden Springer. They spent, I think, two second round picks to get Tillman
Yeah.
in house last year. I'm like, my general philosophy is there's probably not another big-ish guy like Tillman out there that's going to be better than what he can do. He has that chemistry now, a little bit of versatility. They played him in that Dallas series. He was perfectly fine. It's been a little surprising he hasn't played more. But like when you look at this roster, if you were
Mm-hmm.
in Brad Stevens' shoes, is there a position? Is there a need on this team? I think the one that I hear the most up here is just wing depth, which is weird to say
Yeah.
because you got Jalen and Jason, but I think 30 teams around the league are looking for wing depth. Is that is the O'Shea Brissett void, I guess I call it. Is
Yeah.
that something they need to consider, if only to navigate the regular season and keep everybody healthy until the playoffs?
Yeah. I mean, I think, yeah, listen, everybody wants wing depth. You know, like that's always the big thing. Like, hey, can we get a big wing to, you know, off our bench and stuff? I think all playoff teams are looking for that. I think certainly can you get a little more front court depth, you know, kind of a in between 4-3, something in that nature here? That would be certainly a priority. I think the interesting thing with the apron rules, and you know, not many people know this, and that we're, you know, continually learning, is that you can trade for minimum players and still exceed the apron, right? Like
Yeah.
that's not, you know, that's kind of a little bit of a loophole there where you can scour the market and you can maybe look at it, I don't know, a team that's out of it, whether it be Utah or Detroit or Brooklyn, and maybe there's somebody there that maybe that would, instead of sending your pick with Jaden Springer, maybe you go out and use that pick to acquire somebody to give you some
Mm.
help there. I think we'll be interested to see what happens in the you know, PJ Tucker is interesting. I mean, listen, that's something the Celtics have to do their homework on, not from a trade standpoint, just from a waiver standpoint, because I think his
Hmm.
salary is below that threshold there, but he hasn't played all year.
Mm.
How do you integrate him? Is he happy? You know, like you saw like Jay Crowder, who was out of the league for a while, is in Sacramento now. Like it's the name sounds great, but what's the production from? And I think whoever they get has to be content as far as what their role is going to be. Like, you know, you're going to hear probably a lot about Lonnie Walker
Yep.
over the next you know 5-6 weeks here because he's got a buyout in his contract in Europe. I talked to his agent when I was driving up to Orlando, and he's like, he's playing awesome. Like for Europe, like he's like on a great you know, on a great streak as far as playing over there here. So that's a name. Listen, he was in your camp. You
Yep.
know him. He knows the system. He can come in and without the expectations that he has to play, but it's a nice insurance policy for a guy that you can throw in a playoff game because he's been there before.
Yeah, and the Celtics had to cross that bridge already in terms of like he played so good. I think, he struggled in Abu Dhabi, and I think we said, we get it. Like he's going to need volume, he's going to need usage, and the Celtics just don't have that. And then he kind of eased in and figured it out and understood the system better and really forced the issue. There's some thoughts, like there's definitely been the rumors out there if they had been able to move Springer earlier, would they have considered keeping Lonnie? And I think that's something you have to at least investigate. I think he's on the radar for, and I wonder if there'll be a team that can offer him more opportunity than Boston can, but he does have the familiarity. And if there's nothing else out there and he wants to kind of go for a championship, his personality is great. I don't know how much you've
Yeah.
dealt with Lonnie, but oh my God, talk about salt of the earth, just wanting to be a part of this.
I think guys like that have an edge
Yeah.
because they've been continuously counted out. Um, I thought Lonnie Walker in Brooklyn before he had an injury was terrific.
Mm-hmm.
like really good. I thought Lonnie Walker in spurts with the Lakers, certainly some of those Denver games, I thought was really good. And it's like you wonder why, right? Like it feels like we get in this world where roster spots like 10 to 15 are for your young players, right? Like those are our development pieces, and guys get slotted. And I say it every year, eventually when 60 players get drafted, 60 players are going to be squeezed out,
Right.
right? Like 60 guys who are 50, whatever guys, 55 guys are going to be squeezed out. And that's why I think, down the road when we get to expansion, whenever we get there, that just opens up another layer of things here. But I do think players like Lonnie, who's looking for an opportunity, and really, I'm here in Orlando watching guys that have been out of league. I watched Nasir Little last night,
Yeah.
right? I saw Josh Christopher playing for the Heat, who was a former first round pick, who was awesome, right? And he's on a two-way. Like, so I think they appreciate it more when you're out of the league and you're not one of 450. And I think that gives them certainly more of an edge to get back in it.
It's going to be fascinating. I was going to say you'll get to see the main Celtics. I think they play tonight.
Yeah.
Drew Peterson, who
Yeah.
again like was snatched up. I think if the Celtics can't find a fit that they like, on the open market, or even if they just fill that 15th spot and then Springer gets moved or whatever the case may be, there would be a chance where Drew Peterson could do the Nemi Keita and just go from
Yeah.
two-way to the roster. Guy who came in, has committed, has shown some flashes, has gotten thrown in there in a couple of games. It's fascinating. It's funny that you say the minimum contract stuff. I start going around the league and I'm like already looking at New Orleans, like Daniel Tice. I don't know what he's got left in the tank, but he's got the familiarity. Javante
Yeah.
Green's down there. Like I start going through
Yeah.
every former Celtic.
Yeah.
Look at
Look at the teams. I don't know, in the bottom of the
anyone in the
standings.
Cooper Flag hunt, right?
Go through the minimum market as far as who those guys, who could be available.
Yeah, it's fascinating. But that the sneaky rule change that really hurt is the one you mentioned, where teams used to just have that $5 million in cash
Yeah.
or $3 million to send out and could pay off to take somebody. And now you
Yeah.
can't do that. And it's gonna be really interesting watching teams try to create space and try to create, get rid of contracts that were previously movable. Uh, it went from checkers to chess now, and
Yeah.
at least the Celtics were good to be ahead of the curve in building this roster. But man, it gets tough to tweak it. So fascinated to see how it plays out. So Bob, I need all the scouting report on all those G League guys so I can sound smart.
I got them I got a running diary going here. We had 8 games on Friday or Thursday. I saw 5 of them, I think,
Mhm.
which was a lot of basketball, to say the least.
And Bronny
But
played early, right? Did people
yeah, he
come in
did.
and
Listen,
then
he was the noon game. I thought he played pretty decent. He had like 16, 5, and 4. He looked a lot better than he did in summer league, I thought. He was comfortable, certainly more comfortable than he was. I think it's his size will be a challenge.
Yeah.
I think that's the biggest thing for him. And he played more point guard, which I think is probably where he's going to lean more towards. I always thought it would have been better for him to kind of get out of the Lakers shadow, to be in
Mm-hmm.
Toronto, to be in another organization where your spotlight is on him.
100% agree.
But he proves that he, like, at least in that setting, he belongs. Now it's a matter of kind of, getting up to the parent club
Yeah.
and going from there. But there's a lot of, certainly there's a lot of talent down here, guys. Just, we have January 5th is the first day you can sign players to 10-day contracts. January 7th is when guys on non-guaranteed or partials can their contracts get guaranteed. Trade season, as you said, opened up. We saw a couple of trades with Schroeder going
Yep.
to Golden State and Thomas Bryant going to Indiana. So it's starting to get a little more buzz. And I think certainly you're going to hear a lot more about, if we haven't heard a lot about Jimmy Butler, a lot.
I saw that dominated a lot of your Thursday.
It's dominated the last 10 days of my life. I'm trying to be the bearer of common sense, right?
Yes.
Like to say, like, it's funny, and this with Boston. like when Jimmy Butler is being in the news and everybody's talking about Phoenix or Dallas or Golden State, and I said, like, well, you have to also think about how it benefits the Heat, right? Like, what
Right.
do they get out of this? They're not just going to trade a guy. And I think you'll see a lot of big names. Certainly, Levine will be again, Ingram. But the reality is that we live in a day and age where you can't take back more money in a trade if you're an apron
Mm-hmm.
team. We've got almost a third of the league in the either in the apron or close to luxury tax. It's hard to trade with when it's hard to trade with apron teams with all that, and it's a little bit difficult to move. And when you have five teams that monopolize 65 first round picks over the next 7 years, the monopoly of draft picks aren't there either. So that's going to be a little bit more challenging. And I think what you'll see, Chris, is there'll be a lot of 3 or 4 team deals just because
Mm.
they'll need Detroit and they'll need Utah and they'll need some of these other Charlotte for Brooklyn, Washington to come in and take some of these contracts that they can't take on with some draft compensation tied to it.
I can see Danny Ainge hearing that and just rubbing his hands together, looking for more draft picks and talent to stockpile out there. But before I let you go, I've always kept you way
Yeah.
longer than I told you.
Yeah, sure.
One thing I do need to clarify, the one thing, because I think people get the rules, the no cash out, the no
Yeah.
aggregating contracts,
Yeah.
the draft picks, like,
Yeah.
and what can be frozen, and
Yep.
like how much do you think that do you think the Celtics will be at all hesitant to move those first round picks, both in terms of trying to acquire talent, further down the road to supplement a expensive core. But like, because of these new frozen pick rules, do you think
Yeah.
teams will be less likely to move that with the fear that, they're going to linger in the apron and deals and picks will eventually be frozen?
Yeah. I mean, I think, certainly for Boston, they're going to, I would say, highly likely finish over the second apron. And their 2032 pick will become frozen. Right. I mean, that's just how the rules are. I think there's how the rules are written though, that there's ways for you to get out of that. Certainly we'll see where their spending is if, what, 2 out of the next 4 years they're
Yep.
under, and they can unfreeze that pick and go from there. Um, so I do think that's some teams that scares them, right? Because it limits them another, like, if you're Phoenix, all right, we only have
Mm.
2031 to trade. We could have had 32, but now we can't. But as I said, when we started doing this, I think where Boston is, where they do still have the resources
Second
of,
round picks, yeah.
yeah, second round picks, or their other first round picks I think you can get away with trading 32. I mean, get away with 32 being frozen,
Yep.
because at the end of the day, eventually it will come. I think eventually, as the cap grows with this
Yep.
TV money, the apron levels grow. Like they all work kind of hand in hand here, and that there'll be an opportunity where maybe 2 years in a row that they'll be under that threshold.
Yeah, and I just think it's an important distinction to make here because people are, we're so used to being able to trade every other year, and we spend so much time on Stepien rule, but now it gets a little bit more difficult, and I'll be fascinated. Brad Stevens doesn't typically just sit on his hands this time of year, but man, the rules are making it tough. So,
Yeah.
Bobby, as usual, I will be bugging you with all sorts of minutia. Get your rest while you can, and good good luck with all the stuff down there. I appreciate you taking the time.
I appreciate it. Thanks, Chris.
You know how much restraint it took me not to mention that Robert Williams makes less than that $12.8 million mid-level that Bobby pointed out is the threshold for the Celtics. Now, there's no way Portland is letting him walk away or buying him out. He has another year left on his contract after this, so my little bringing Time Lord home fantasy will have to wait at least another season or so. And I live in fear that a team out there like the Lakers or the Knicks or someone good would swoop in and make a play for Rob at the deadline. But for now, I'm just thrilled that he's still showing those glimpses out there, and I hope he gets an opportunity on a contender to show what he can do. I just wish it was here in Boston. I do think it's going to be fascinating moving forward, like what the Celtics do. They have the open roster spot. They can easily just add a player, but even a minimum salary player, it's more money committed to an already expensive roster. Me and Bobby laid it out there. Like there is going to be some difficulty trying to, even if you just want to move Springer to get the savings on the tax, that could be difficult based on the way the rules are set up. But and I think a night even like against Chicago last night showed, as deep as the Celtics are, when you're missing a Sam Hauser when you don't have a Tillman off the bench, when your depth is slightly depleted, maybe that won't be a problem in the playoffs when you're leaning on 7, 8 guys each night. But just to navigate the regular season, you need bodies. And I wonder if this team will be motivated to just kind of search for another wing. Do you think about Lonnie overseas? Do you think about bringing back O'Shea Brissett? There's going to be options out there. Who else ends up on the market? And I think each one is going to bring on a little bit of a conversation. And you know what we're going to do? We'll be right here on the Celtics Talk podcast, obsessing about every little player that becomes available and whether it's the right fit for the Celtics in their quest to repeat as champions. So I need you guys to go like, subscribe, check us out on the YouTube page. We'll be right back with you with the post-game pod on Saturday night after the rematch with the Bulls, and hopefully we will still not be talking about any officials. We'll catch you next time on the Celtics Talk podcast.